Validation is an integrated process in the pharmaceutical industry as it is mandatory to comply with national and international standards. This video takes you to the latest validation guidelines of WHOTRS, which says about the risk-based, life cycle approach in validation. These guidelines WHOTRS allow for different approaches to process validation. The principles described are mainly applicable to non-sterile finished pharmaceutical dosage forms. Similar approaches may be applicable to active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, and sterile products. The objectives of process validation include ensuring that the process design is evaluated to show that the process is reproducible, reliable, and robust. The commercial manufacturing process is defined, monitored, and controlled. Assurance is gained on a continuous basis to show that the process remains in a state of control. A life cycle approach to validation is recommended in this guideline. Thorough knowledge of product and process development studies, previous manufacturing experience, and QRM principles are essential in all approaches to process validation, as the focus is now on the life cycle approach. The life cycle approach links product and process development, validation of the commercial manufacturing process, and maintaining the process in a state of control during routine commercial production. A risk assessment approach should be followed to determine the scope and extent to which process and starting material variability may affect product quality. The critical steps and critical process parameters should be identified, justified, and documented, and based on relevant studies carried out during the design stage and on process knowledge, according to the stages of the product life cycle. During process validation and qualification, the critical process parameters should be monitored. The use of process analytical technology, PAT, which may include inline, online, and/or at-line controls and monitoring, is recommended to ensure that a process is in a state of control during manufacture. Process validation data should be generated for all products to demonstrate the adequacy of the manufacturing process. The validation should be carried out in accordance with GMP, and data should be held at the manufacturing location whenever possible and should be available for inspection. Process validation is associated with the collection and evaluation of data throughout the life cycle of a product, from the process design stage to commercial production, and provides scientific evidence that a process is capable of consistently delivering a quality product. It may be helpful to use a flow diagram depicting all the operations and controls in the process to be validated. When applying QRM to a given operation, the steps preceding and following that operation should also be considered. Amendments to the flow diagram may be made where appropriate, and should be recorded as part of the validation documentation. The validation should cover all manufactured strengths of a product, and the extent of validation at each manufacturing site should be based on risk assessment. A matrix approach or bracketing may be acceptable and should also be based on appropriate risk assessment. Manufacturers should ensure that the principles of process validation described in these guidelines are implemented. These cover the phases of validation during process design, scale-up, qualification of premises, utilities and equipment, and process performance qualification, and continuous process verification to ensure that the process remains in a state of control. According to the latest validation guide, the entire life cycle of the product is bifurcated into 3 stages. The first step is process design, where all the knowledge is gathered during the scale-up. The second step is process qualification, wherein the manufacturing system is validated at strategic points. The final step is continued verification, which is an ongoing process. These 3 principles are essential for ensuring consistent quality and production throughout. Pharmaceutical companies are implementing the following approaches to improve efficiency and increase productivity. First, let us see about the first stage, process design. Process design should be verified during product development. Process design should normally cover design of experiments, process development, the manufacture of products for use in clinical trials, pilot scale batches, and technology transfer. Process design should cover aspects for the selection of materials, expected production variation, selection of production technology/process, and qualification of the unitary processes that form the manufacturing process as a whole, selection of in-process controls, tests, inspection and its suitability for the control strategy. The number of batches included in the process design stage of validation should be appropriate and sufficient to include, but not be limited to, the expected variations in starting materials, and confirm the suitability of the equipment and manufacturing technology. A development report or a technology transfer document, formally reviewed and approved by research and development personnel, and formally accepted by manufacturing, engineering and quality personnel, should be prepared. Such a document may include information such as QTPP, desired clinical performance, bills of materials, approved suppliers, finished product specifications and test methods, in-process testing specifications, equipment recommendations, master batch production records, master batch packaging records, stability reports, critical quality attributes, critical process parameters, batch comparisons, data on formulation batches, stability batches, clinical/bio batches and scale-up batches. These documents should be readily available to the manufacturing. The second stage of new validation approach is process qualification. Personnel, premises, utilities, support systems and equipment should be appropriately qualified before manufacturing processes are validated. Materials, environmental controls, measuring systems, apparatus and methods should be considered during validation. The stages of qualification of equipment may include design, installation, operation and performance of equipment. Traditionally, 3 batches have been considered the normal and acceptable number for process validation. However, the number of batches should be justified and based on a risk assessment that includes, for example, variability of results from the process design stage, variability of materials, product history, where the product is being transferred from and where it will be produced. Manufacturers should define the stage at which the process is considered to be validated and the basis on which that decision was made. The decision should include a justification for the number of batches used based on the complexity and expected variability of the process and critical quality attributes, CQAs. Successful completion of process performance qualification stage of the life cycle is required for commercial distribution. A risk assessment should be performed for the change from scale-up to commercial batch size. Process qualification should confirm that scale-up in batch size did not adversely affect the characteristics of the product and that a process that operates within the predefined specified parameters consistently produces a product which meets all its CQAs and control strategy requirements. The process should be verified on commercial scale batches prior to marketing of the product. Extensive inline and/or online and/or at-line controls may be used to monitor process performance and product quality in a timely manner. Results on relevant quality attributes of incoming materials or components, in-process material and finished products should be collected. This should include the verification of attributes, parameters and endpoints and assessment of CQA and critical process parameter, CPP, trends. Process analytical technology applications and multivariate statistical process control can be used. Validation should be done in accordance with process validation protocols. A written protocol is essential for this stage of process validation. The protocol should include or reference at least the following elements: the manufacturing conditions including operating parameters, processing limits and component, raw material, inputs. The data to be collected and when and how they will be evaluated. The type of testing or monitoring to be performed, in process, release, characterization, and acceptance criteria for each significant processing step. The scientifically justified sampling plan, including sampling points, number of samples and the frequency of sampling for each unit operation and attribute. The number of batches for which additional monitoring is proposed. Status of the validation of analytical methods used in measuring the process, In-process materials and the product, a description of the statistical models or tools used, review and approval of the protocol by appropriate departments and the quality unit, a description of the process, details of the equipment and/or facilities to be used, including measuring or recording equipment, together with its calibration status, the variables to be monitored with appropriate justification, the samples to be taken, who, where, when, how many and how much, sample size, the product performance characteristics or attributes to be monitored, together with the test methods, the acceptable limits, personnel responsibilities, details of methods for recording and evaluating results, including statistical analysis. Data should be collected and reviewed against predetermined acceptance criteria and fully documented in process validation reports. The report should reflect the validation protocol. A dual protocol report can be used, however, such reports must be designed to ensure clarity and sufficient space for recording of results. The outcome should confirm that the acceptance criteria have been met. Any deviations, including abandoned studies, should be explained and justified. The planned commercial production and control records, which contain the operational limits and overall strategy for process control, should be carried forward to the next phase for confirmation. The third stage of new approach is continued process verification. Manufacturers should monitor product quality of commercial batches after completion of process design and process qualification. This will provide evidence that a state of control is maintained throughout the product life cycle. The scope and extent of process verification will be influenced by a number of factors including prior development and knowledge of the manufacturing of similar products and/or processes, the extent of process understanding gained from development studies and commercial manufacturing experience, the complexity of the product and/or manufacturing process, the level of process automation and analytical technologies used. For legacy products, with reference to the product life cycle process robustness and manufacturing history since the point of commercialization, as appropriate. Manufacturers should describe the appropriateness and feasibility of the verification strategy in the protocol, including the process parameters and material attributes that will be monitored as well as the validated analytical methods that will be employed. Manufacturers should define the type of testing or monitoring to be performed, the acceptance criteria to be applied, how the data will be evaluated and the actions to be taken. Any statistical models or tools used should be described. If continuous processing is employed, the stage at which the commercial process is considered to be validated should be stated based on the complexity of the process, expected variability and manufacturing experience of the company. Periods of enhanced sampling and monitoring may help to increase process understanding as part of continuous improvement. Information on process trends, such as the quality of incoming materials or components, in-process and finished product results and non-conformances should be collected and assessed to verify the validity of the original process validation or to identify changes required to the control strategy. The scope of continued process verification should be reviewed periodically and modified if appropriate throughout the product life cycle. This guideline says also about change management. Manufacturers should follow change control procedures when changes are planned to existing systems or processes. The change control procedure and records should ensure that all aspects are thoroughly documented and approved, including regulatory approval where appropriate, variation. Sufficient data should be generated to demonstrate that the revised process will result in a product of the desired quality, consistent with approved specifications. Validation should be considered when changes to production and/or control procedures are planned. Based on risk assessment, changes that may require revalidation could include, but are not limited to, changes in the master formula, methods, starting material manufacturer, starting material manufacturing process, excipient manufacturer, excipient manufacturing process. Changes in the equipment or instruments, for example addition of automatic detection systems. Changes associated with equipment calibrations and the preventive maintenance carried out, which may impact the process. production area and support system changes, for example rearrangement of areas or a new water treatment method. Changes in the manufacturing process, for example mixing times, drying temperatures, transfer of processes to another site, unexpected changes, for example those observed during self-inspection or during routine analysis of process trend data, changes to standard operating procedures, changes to cleaning and hygiene programs. Depending upon the nature of the change being proposed, the change control process should consider whether existing approved specifications will be adequate to control the products subsequent to the implementation of the change. There are various approaches to process validation which include traditional process validation, consisting of prospective and concurrent validation. New approach, that is, process design followed by process qualification and continued process verification, or a combination of traditional process validation and the new approach described in these guidelines. Historical data should be evaluated in cases where there have been changes to the process. This is about implementation of new approach. Manufacturers are encouraged to implement the new validation approach to ensure that processes are of known and acceptable capability. As full implementation of this approach may take time, the traditional approach of prospective validation and concurrent validation may be acceptable in the interim. A combination of elements of the traditional process validation approach and the new continuous process verification approach may be considered appropriate, subject to appropriate controls being in place, based on scientific justification and risk management principles. This page gives you the complete reference for the process validation from the WHOTRS.
If you have any queries, please mail to pharmabells@gmail.com. Subscribe to Pharma Bells to get all the posts.